Okay, let's talk about witchy books. And I think that's probably the question you all that asked me were looking more specifically towards, is what kind of books would I recommend that were specifically pagan in nature. I recommend every single book you can get your hands on. There is no bad book. I have to ride a silver broomstick on my bookshelf. It's there for a couple of reasons. I was intrigued when it came out. I wanted to see how this new take on what Wicca might be was being presented. Doesn't mean I agree with it. In fact, I disagree with a lot of it. But that's not what's important. What's important is I learned the vocabulary of young people that I would meet, that is the book that they first read. It was similar to when Scott Cunningham's books first came out. If I had not read them, I wouldn't have had the vocabulary and the understanding to have a conversation with those who were reading them. I think it's important to get a flavor for where the current trend in writing is for our spirituality and our practices. There's no bad book. Every book will have something you can learn. You will find things you agree with, and you will learn as much from the things you don't agree with as long as you stop to think. I don't agree with this, and this is why. My books are a mess when I'm done with them. I'm not a book purist. I write in them, I highlight them, I bend corners, I do terrible things to the books that are on my shelf. If I end up passing a book on to somebody, it is very difficult for them to read it after what I've done to it. I live with my books. The power of every book is, I agree, I disagree, I learn, and I learn from defining why I don't agree when that's the case. Neo-pagan books are fascinating. So many beautiful bits of poetry, charges, calls to the elements, and seasonal bits of poetry that are very often, they are the most valuable thing in some of these books to me, and I will copy them down. I collect them in my book of the year, which is my version of a book of shadows where I collect bits of inspiration. I love grabbing bits of poetry from these books. There simply is no bad book. So let me talk now specifically about books on witchcraft and paganism, and Wicca specifically, since my references will wander in that direction because many of you were asking about books that really talked to what I do and what my tradition might be. What's going to be missing from this discussion is books on history and our source books. There's lots of good information out there on everything from Aradia to the White Goddess to all the early books to really going back to the ancient Greeks, up through the Renaissance and the ceremonial magicians, and yes, there are all kinds of books, and that's a go on forever discussion in and of itself, and I would just ask that you search for those kind of book inspirations elsewhere. There's good videos on YouTube that I've seen here and there about those kinds of books. The other thing that's not going to be part of this discussion is the books that I have used and been inspired by that have to do with what I think of as woman's Wicca. So the feminist movement, especially in America, with women's spirituality and witchcraft. I'm not leaving it out because it's not important to me, but I had to think of, okay, what will I focus on? And bring it down to a certain area of focus. Those other things, I think you'll find good recommendations out there and good book lists that you can work off of. So, as I look all around me and I think of where am I going to start with my piles of books, I will start, and it will not surprise those of you who know me in the slightest, with Doreen Valiente. I'm going to highly recommend some of these books if you are interested in learning about Wicca specifically. And Doreen's books that I recommend. And again, with these, there's so many good places you can go to get in-depth synopsis and test chapters and things like that for books. So if any of these intrigue you, that's what I suggest that you do. We'll start off with Doreen's Witchcraft for tomorrow. It originally came out in 1978. Now this is a new copy, a newer copy, a relatively new copy at least. So it's not my original version of it, but why I recommend it to you? Basics. Basics, simply put. She has a way of, for all of us, it's always been, those of us who practice my kind of Wicca, she has always had a way of saying it simply and beautifully. and it's a primer. The Witchcraft for Tomorrow is a primer, which you will find helpful. I also suggest her ABC of Witchcraft. And for one of you who we had a discussion recently, and we were trying to figure out, did I still have my copy of it? Indeed, I do. I don't know if this is my original copy, although it's rough enough looking it could be. This was 1973. And it's an alphabetical listing, almost an encyclopedia, of all the terms that we would run into around Wicca and witchcraft and paganism in general. It's valuable because if you are interested in a path similar to mine where you are exploring Wicca, then having someone with her knowledge and experience who will simply and concisely list for you what something is, it's a good reference book. ABC of Witchcraft isn't something you necessarily want to pick up and sit down and read from beginning to end. It's a good reference book to have. Highly recommend that. The next book I'm going to recommend to you is the book, the one book I recommend if you read nothing else and you were interested in studying a bit about traditional Wicca to see if it appealed to you. This is the book that I recommend. And this has been changed. Every time Vivienne Crawley updates this book, she renames it, or her publisher renames it for her. My version that I currently have on my shelf is Wicca, the Old Religion in the New Millennium. And for a while it was in the New Age. I think it was in the modern time. It's changed. It's actually changed several times as far as the title, but it's Vivienne Crawley. And let's see, the original publication date on this was, Thorson's published it in '96. And this, to me, is the best description of what Wicca is in the modern sense. What it is at the level of working magic, being in the natural world, spiritually, at the level of the psyche, and at the level of a relationship to the gods. If you read nothing else and you wanted to know what's Annie's path like, what does she do and why does she do it, Wicca is the book that does that. It's the one book I recommend if you're interested in exploring Wicca in a traditional sense. So Doreen Valiente, those two books, and Vivienne Crawley's Wicca. That's the place I'd have you begin if you were interested in learning more about what I practice and who I am as a Wiccan. I want to spend some time with the oldies but goodies because in the end, for me, when it comes to Wicca specifically, it was all done well during the 70s and the early 80s, and well, books since I have found good and interesting. To me, they have become a reinventing of the same thing over and over again, said in different ways. It makes them no less valuable because one of those authors may write something that resonates with you that wasn't resonating with you when another author wrote it, especially when it comes to some of these older books that I adore and moved me and inspired me, and where I took some of my teachings in the 70s and the 80s. They may not resonate with you, but one of these newer ways of saying it, of turning the information around and presenting it, may resonate more with you. Here's my oldies but goodies. If you were studying with me, you would read the 3 books I just told you, Vivienne Crawley's books and those 2 books by Doreen Valiente, and then I would expect that you would read all of the following. The Grimoire of Lady Sheba. First published in 1974, in fact, one of the first of Llewellyn's books, I think, if we go back to that time. It is quaint, and it is lovely, and it is very true to what Wicca was in the years I was studying it. And it's a good reading for young pagans and pagans new to the path to read. Some of these books, when you read them, one of the things you are learning about is why I recommend that everyone read The Spiral Dance if you're an American witch, because if nothing else, it helps you understand those of us who were moved by that and who it is part of who we are. Same thing with the grimoire of Lady Sheba. You get to pick up on some of the drama and the beauty and the passion of who we were in the 70s, where ritual was not the same moment for moment or holiday to holiday. And it was from the heart and flamboyant and fun and very powerful. I highly recommend reading The Grimoire of Lady Sheba. Now, those of you who know me know that I did take my early training with the Gardnerians, and therefore it won't come as any surprise to you that I'm going to recommend Buckland's complete book of witchcraft. Now, you may find this on a shelf someplace, and it doesn't look quite the same when you find it. This one is a slightly older version of it. Here's a newer version that's been revised. Basically, it looks the same. This is not the #1 book I recommend for people who are trying to learn about what Wicca is. It's interesting that even in light of the fact that Raymond Buckland means so much to me from those early Gardnerian days, I don't know why this feels dated to me. Something as quaint and fun as the Grimoire of Lady Sheba doesn't feel dated to me, but for some reason Raymond's book actually feels a bit dated to me. But it's a good encyclopedia. There's so many tidbits of, nothing is explained in depth. It's like bits and pieces of all kinds of things. It's a good place to spend some time going, I'd like to explore that, no interest in exploring that. It's a good place to set up almost a study plan of what intrigues you. And I almost wonder, because he started wandering off in all different kinds of directions too, holding what felt true to him but moving on to other things, and I wonder if he wasn't feeling it was a little bit dated too. I do, however, highly recommend Raymond's Wicca for Life. The way of the craft from birth to the Summerland. I highly recommend that one. It's more about practice. Really, really like that. It's more focused. And in a way I find it more spiritually meaningful as a tool to develop and grow spirituality. But when it comes to those older books that really inspired me personally, which you may enjoy, they're easily found. Nowadays, I have 2 authors I'd like to recommend to you. And that is going to be Herman Slater's books. And as I went wandering around trying to find Herman Slater's books in my library, I realized I must have loaned out a couple of them. The one I held up is a book of pagan rituals, and that's the first one. And there is also a book of pagan rituals 2 and 3. And these are excellent to, as much to give you a sense of how it was never one set thing in the 70s. We played and we made each ritual different and unique, and the power of the poetry in this book is amazing, and the creativity, and just really gives you a good feel for, in a traditional sense, how to connect to deity and ritual. And my favorite from those older books, the collection that is called, in book form, The Magical Rites from the Crystal Well. Ed Fitch. Ed Fitch was somebody who particularly moved and inspired me when I was a young witch. Very much about the beauty and the love and the harmony and the balance, while at the same time being very much about strength and honor, the power of your word. He inspired me probably as much as any witch I ever met in real life. Love his books. I wish there had been tons and tons and tons of them, but The Magical Rites from the Crystal Well, highly recommend. And also his Grimoire of Shadows.